Now and then I enjoy playing retro games on my laptop or on the Steam Deck, but I don't see myself quickly bringing them along with me like I do with my Nintendo 3DS. With the size of an average smartphone, it comfortably fits in most pockets, sometimes so well that I forget where I left it. And its foldable nature really makes for a durable console. It's honestly a great form factor. But people like to say the 3DS was a failure in terms of sales. And sure, I can see what you mean if you compare it to its predecessor, but did you know that the Nintendo 3DS is the 12th best-selling console with almost 76 million sales? That puts it just behind the PlayStation Portable and comfortably in front of the NES and Xbox One. Not sure how that's a commercial failure in anyone's books. With so many sales, chances are you might still have a 3DS laying around somewhere. And while it might seem enticing to get a gaming handheld to emulate retro games, the 3DS that you already own offers access to a surprising range of games once its powers get unleashed through modding. I estimated that you can play anywhere between 7,000 and 15,000 games on the 3DS, which is crazy. And sure, the calculation is very rough and heavily depends on the game's region, but it also doesn't account for all the systems you can actually emulate, only the ones I will show you in this video. Which means that in reality the list could be even longer. So today I want to give you an overview of what a modded Nintendo 3DS is truly capable of. We're going to emulate many retro consoles from NES to PS1 and check out their quirks and how they perform. So let's get started. The Nintendo 3DS is available in many shapes and sizes. It can be a bit confusing to understand the differences sometimes, but the most important distinction is between the new models and the original models, also most commonly called the old 3DS. The new Nintendo 3DS has among others a new button layout, the infamous 3DS knob that acts as the C-stick, improved face tracking technology, and most importantly, better processing power. I say all of this as a bit of a disclaimer, because some features I'm going to present might only work with the new Nintendo 3DS. To make it clear whether you can run it or not, I will display these symbols at the bottom of the screen. To start off with our first emulators, we don't actually need to search very far. With the 3DS lineup, Nintendo again offered its Virtual Console service. It's a set of various official emulators specifically designed by Nintendo for Nintendo hardware. And the way you could play them on the 3DS was through a simple purchase from the eShop back when it was still available. You could find all kinds of consoles on there, such as the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, NES, Game Gear, in Japan the TurboGrafx 16, Game Boy Advance with the Ambassador program, and later also SNES games. In general, they're regarded as very good emulators when it comes to performance. Most likely because they're integrated into the 3DS system, as you can tell from features such as save states, screen settings, and the sleep mode actually working. And although only a small selection of titles was ever made available on the eShop, the emulator community found a way to crack open the Virtual Console to inject games that were never offered by Nintendo. And the best part? You can easily do that yourself using New Super Ultimate Injector 3DS. It's a free tool that you can download for your PC that I've linked in the description. Just choose the console you want, add the ROM to it, configure it to your liking, and at the end you have a CIA file that you can install on the 3DS. It's really cool to see it right on the home screen like this. You can even customize the images shown or swap to the console version you prefer. And then all you have to do is just hit A and you're good to go, just like any other regular 3DS application. And this works for all sorts of consoles. If you like, you can also choose a different emulator other than the Virtual Console, but the downside is that some of them don't run as smoothly, and in some cases there really is no way around a standalone emulator. The old 3DS, for example, doesn't support SNES games from the Virtual Console, so here you have to go with something like the SNES 9X. It's ideal if you want more settings and features that the official one doesn't offer, such as configurable controls, screen overlays, and many more. When it comes to Nintendo DS games, the 3DS doesn't even sweat. I can simply insert the DS cartridge into the 3DS and voila, it runs. Maybe you've never consciously thought much about it, but we all kinda know this is not emulation, and this is because many of the DS's components are actually present inside the 3DS. This allows for native support, basically as if you were holding a regular DS in your hands. The console even takes a few seconds to boot into a separate DS mode. But there really isn't much to say about regular DS games, they just work as you might expect. However, I'm sure many of you have heard of Twilight Menu++ before. It's a separate application that lets you conveniently play DS ROMs right from your SD card. And it also boots into that DS mode, so games run great. There's actually even a compatibility list, but it's pretty much all green. We even tried multiplayer on it and it works flawlessly. What makes Twilight Menu even better is that you can use TW Patch. Found in the Universal Updater, you can enable widescreen for your DS games and even change some screen settings. It will take a few minutes to patch, but it gives off more of a premium feel once it's done. Then there's also an option for cheating. Maybe you already have your own, but if you're looking for cheats, there's an app called NDSI Cheat Databases that you can again find in the Universal Updater. Install that, and once you get to any game, you can press Y and it will show you all the available cheats. So we all now know that the Nintendo DS runs natively on the 3DS. But did you know that the same holds true for the Gameboy Advance? No, not for the cartridge, but for the hardware inside the 3DS. Because the 3DS has a comparable CPU architecture to the DS, by extension it's able to natively run GBA games. The only thing effectively being emulated, or rather simulated, is the actual Game Boy Advance cartridge slot. Similar to all previous mentioned consoles, the simplest way to install GBA games on the 3DS is again also using the new Super Ultimate Injector 3DS. The GBA version of the Virtual Console basically runs so well that emulators cannot compete in terms of performance. However, its biggest downside is that it takes forever to start and doesn't allow for easily accessible save files. That's where OpenAGB Firm can prove to be an elegant solution. Once installed from the Universal Updater, all you have to do is hold the start button when you boot up the 3DS and it lets you start in GBA mode right away. You just have to choose your ROMs from the boot menu and you're ready to get going. Using the config file, then you can also customize some aspects of your experience like the gamma of the screen, and conveniently the save files are then all stored on your SD card for easy access. But because it runs outside the 3DS environment, you won't be able to utilize built-in functions like the sleep mode, home screen, and other 3DS features. Hello? Hey, you can't just pretend to have a clamshell form factor and call yourself a Game Boy Advance. So yeah, if you close the 3DS, the game will just keep running. For any extra emulation features like save states, cheats, fast forwarding, motion sensor support, and even the ability to stream game footage with NTR, your best bet is MGBA, an actual emulator. The performance won't match anything running natively, and old 3DS users might have even more difficulties, but it's closer to what you'd expect from a modern emulator these days. Unless you really prefer the quality of life features that you get from an emulator, chances are you might never come in contact with MGBA. However, one case where I used it was for one of my childhood games that I used to play, Yoshi's Topsy Turvy. What's special about this title is that the actual game cartridge had a motion sensor built into it. So when you just run the ROM with OpenAGB Firm or as a regular CIA file, nothing will happen. But run it with MGBA and voila! The world twists and turns just like how I remember. And the reason for that is MGBA's motion sensor support. For Game Boy Advance it can be a bit difficult to find the right choice, so I've left a link to a handy overview in the description if you're wondering which way is best to play. So because many people compare the 3DS's graphics to the GameCube's, you'd assume it can easily run 5th generation consoles such as the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1. I mean, these two are even from the same family. Oh look, this is your great-grandfather! But as it turns out, Nintendo 64 emulation is notoriously difficult to run. However, the Daedalus X64 team miraculously made it work anyway. But what it comes down to is that most Nintendo 64 games on average have a quite mediocre performance. You'll have to heavily rely on a compatibility list to determine which games work and which don't. In total, there are only around 70 games that are considered to run well, some of which can be quite random to be honest. So some titles run pretty well, such as Mario Kart 64, Wave Race 64, and Super Mario 64. Some like Donkey Kong 64 run much slower than the original, but still manage to exist on the 3DS even though they shouldn't. While other games such as the Mario Party suffer from crashes so excessively it's practically unplayable. Mario Party, more like Mario Party pooper. It's really a bit of a mixed bag, but at least you get the standard emulator features such as save states and configurable controls. So maybe there's something for you on the list that does work. In case you're curious, I've made a video where I tested 10 games on the Daedalus X64 emulator. If you want to see it, feel free to click on the link somewhere on the screen. And then we have the PlayStation 1. Honestly, I was quite surprised to learn that there's an actual PS1 emulator on the 3DS. So I made a video where I tested the RetroArch PCSX rearmed emulator to see whether it really worked, and it does! And so many people proceeded to bash me in the comments for being surprised that it runs better than the Nintendo 64 emulator. Yes, okay, I get it now. This is a 32-bit console and this is a 64-bit console, and that makes a really big difference, just to keep it simple. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's still really impressive. With the right settings you can run PS1 games with amazing FPS and no crashes. It feels right at home on the 3DS. Although I should clarify that that's on the new Nintendo 3DS, not the original one. The old 3DS can also sort of run PS1 games, but from what I've heard it's quite limited in its performance. But over on the new Nintendo 3DS you can really run anything from Tomb Raider, Spyro, Metal Gear Solid and so on. If you're interested, feel free to click the link somewhere on the screen to see all the 12 games I tested in my video. I still have yet to find a game that doesn't work. I only struggled with Gran Turismo 2 and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the latter of which apparently you can run perfectly with the right settings. Unfortunately I didn't have them in my video, but later I found this Reddit post with great settings that I've linked in the description. Some of it is outdated, but if you scroll down you will find updated settings in the comments that some great people left behind. However, if you paid very close attention a few minutes ago, you might have spotted the PlayStation 1 on the emulator list of new Super Ultimate Injector, which means that you can turn PS1 games into CIA files and run them directly from your home screen. And while that sounds great in theory, in practical terms the performance is much worse. Despite this method also using the PCSX rearmed emulator, it's not making full use of it. Instead, you're actually running a forwarder. Although you can configure it while setting it up, your options are quite limited. Some less graphically demanding games, such as Bust-A-Move 2, will probably run fine, but you're still giving up on the ability to optimize your experience. In that regard, I strongly recommend using the RetroArch standalone emulator instead. So, SEGA Consoles might be a bit of a vague description, but it's actually one that fits very well with our next emulator, Pico Drive. With it you can play games from the SEGA Master System and SEGA Genesis, which we call SEGA Mega Drive here in outside of North America. But not only that, SEGA CD and SEGA 32X games are also supported. As with previous emulators, you can find Pico Drive using the Universal Updater. However, another option is to do it through RetroArch and download the libretro core for Pico Drive, which is how you play SEGA CD games. But we'll get to that in a bit. The emulator itself offers most standard features such as save states, changing the screen size, configurable controls, and so on. All of the supported consoles also have a compatibility list that I've linked below. You'll be able to play a majority of games, with some having minor issues and a few not running at all. This differs quite a bit per system as well. Initially, I thought the Master System would have the best compatibility with the 3DS, considering it's an older console. However, it seems to have many games with performance problems. During my time with the emulator, I didn't experience any issues though. The same holds true for the SEGA Genesis / Mega Drive. Games ran incredibly smoothly and it was a pleasant experience overall, from Echo the Dolphin to Sonic 3D Blast. That is, until I got to more graphically fancy 32X games that use the SEGA Virtual Processor, such as Virtua Racing Deluxe. It would let me play for a few seconds, but resulted in a crash each time. Virtua Fighting, on the other hand, at least let me win before it crashed, so in that regard it's a bit more polite. But according to the compatibility list, both of these should apparently work. Maybe I don't have the right settings, so take my gameplay with a grain of salt. Other 32X games like Knuckles Chaotix for example were completely fine. And now for SEGA CD games we'll have to switch to RetroArch. This core also works for Master System, Genesis and 32X games. Which one you want to use is up to you. Some people say that the standalone Pico Drive works better for the old 3DS, while the RetroArch core is better for the new 3DS. Either way, for SEGA CD you'll need this version. I used CHD files and the performance was overall pretty good. There is actually a way to emulate SEGA Saturn games on the 3DS using the libretro core called Yabaooze, and what you're looking at right now is probably the only footage of it still online. Sadly, even after searching for hours, I couldn't find a way to download Yabaooze for the 3DS anymore. And yes, it runs so bad that its performance is not measured in frames per second, but rather seconds per frame. And despite being completely useless, it's still unfortunate that the only way to quote-unquote run SEGA Saturn games on the 3DS has now vanished. I just thought I would throw it in for fun, and also to show that the 3DS does have some limitations. But to be fair, the SEGA Saturn really sucks to emulate. Despite narrowly still qualifying as Gen Z, I actually have vague memories of somehow playing all sorts of MS-DOS games in my childhood, so finding out about DOSBox on the 3DS was a bit of an unexpected nostalgic trip. Initially, I didn't really know how to set it up, but you basically have to put all your game files in a few folders and then try to navigate to it and access those files via commands. You can do that by holding down this rectangle, which enables the keyboard and other input methods. And usually you're looking for a .exe file. After that, it's a bit of a puzzle to figure out how to make the controls work. Luckily, you can map every key in any way you want. The performance is definitely not ideal, and I assume it's a little rougher on the old 3DS. But from comments online, I've read it should be doable on either system. You can adjust the amount of cycles as well as frame skips directly in this tab over here, which can lead to a drastic improvement of your experience. Whether a game runs well or works at all is a bit of a hit or miss though, and you'll definitely need a lot of patience with certain games. I tried daring a little with Doom and with Wolfenstein 3D, and they run pretty okay. The thing is, while it was a fun time to relive games like Slicks and Slide, as well as 3-playing Turmoil, MS-DOS just really feels out of place on the 3DS, in terms of performance, navigation and also controls. I really wanted to like this emulator, but I just can't recommend this experience. For most games, you'll easily find a better alternative on a different emulator, or as a standalone app such as OpenJazz 3DS for Jazz Jackrabbit for example. But I'm definitely playing some of these games after this video. Sadly, just not on my 3DS. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of the Virtual Boy in the past. It's one of Nintendo's biggest commercial failures in terms of consoles. But hey, just like the 3DS, it was also a console that had a 3D gimmick going on, so they're pretty much a perfect match. And considering this was my first time trying the Virtual Boy, I was kinda excited to experience it. After downloading Red Viper from the Universal Updater along with some ROMs, it was all set up. The cool thing about this Virtual Boy emulator is that it actually makes use of the 3DS's 3D capabilities. Sadly, I can't really show that on camera very well, although maybe it's for the better. I can totally understand now where complaints about headaches come from with the Virtual Boy. A color palette ranging from red to black mixed with 3D is genuinely awful even on the 3DS. So thanks to Red Viper you can change the colors in the settings, which makes a huge difference. And yeah, it does have that charming Nintendo feel to it. I kinda like it. And it ran pretty well in my tests as well. It might not be the greatest thing out there, but honestly just being able to play the Virtual Boy on the 3DS makes me so glad that emulators exist and let me experience a part of gaming history in a close to authentic way. Something I just wouldn't be able to do if these didn't exist. And now to close off the list of emulators, here's a gaming console that doesn't actually exist. Pico 8. It was made to mimic 8-bit systems from the 80s and thereby with its limitations stimulate people to think outside the box. And its 3DS counterpart is better known as Fake 08. With Pico 8 you can basically make your own games and then share them for other people to play using only a PNG file. You can even do that right now on your browser. It's a really charming little project and has many small games to choose from. And with Fake 08 you can enjoy these games directly on your 3DS. So if for example you ever wanted to play a remake of the game Fez, now is your chance. But of course there are many more to choose from. On the new Nintendo 3DS I noticed some slowdowns as compared to when I played them in the browser, but it worked fine most of the time. Definitely a fun project to check out. So there we have it. With all the emulators that I've shown you today, you're capable of playing thousands and thousands of games on your 3DS. But there are actually many more to explore, like the Atari consoles, the Commodore 64 and a few other quirky ones. The 3DS in of itself already has such an outstanding game library, but with all of these systems on top of that, it can really make for the ultimate retro gaming beast for on the go. I hope I've been able to give you a good overview on a lot of emulators that you can run on the Nintendo 3DS today. If you have any tricks, settings, hidden gems, questions or even corrections to share that I've missed in this video, please make sure to leave a comment about it in order for the discussion to continue. Thanks a lot for watching, make sure to subscribe for more videos and I wish you a great day.